Welcome to AM Insider, a production of our own. In this podcast, we will have a series of informative discussions tackling the adoption of additive manufacturing, answering those burning questions and swapping experiences. Learn from experienced individuals on how innovation can push the boundaries of what is possible. Hey, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Justin Hopkins, and with me here as always is Dustin Kloempken. Let's get inside AM.
All right, welcome to this next episode of the AM Insider Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dustin Kloempken, and I am pretty excited to have on this next guest today. This next guest is someone that I know both Justin and I have known and worked with, or been colleagues, or kind of seen from afar on and off for quite a few years. And so it's a little bit different angle that we'll be exploring today that I know both Justin and I hit on once in a while. But Justin, what are you looking to learn today from this next conversation that we have?
I'm looking to learn some of the skill that this particular person has, right? Because it's an area that I could improve on for sure. As far as like marketing and pushing yourself out there and how you do that with a business, I think will be very valuable. I think me personally can learn a lot from this conversation. And I think that it's as a subject that can be overlooked a lot of times by individuals or companies in themselves. And it's a very important part of any business. To me, it's even more crucial within an additive or 3D print business to have good marketing, because it definitely makes an impact. So I'm hoping to learn a little bit about that side of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just from my experience so far in the additive industry, there's okay marketing and promotion and shaking trees and stuff like that. And then there's good stuff. And there's a couple people that do it pretty well. And this person in particular, I think, does pretty well for the industry and for himself and for the companies that he supports. So without further ado, why don't we go ahead and introduce our guest? So Ryan, why don't you go ahead and give us a little introduction about yourself?
Yeah, Dustin and Justin, Ryan Hayford. I appreciate the nice setup here. My name is Ryan Hayford. Like I mentioned, I manage my own marketing consulting firm, Hayford Consulting. I've been in 3D printing, additive manufacturing for about 15 years, originally with Object Geometries, then Stratasys, a company called Big Rep out of Germany. And for the past 5 years, I've been basically doing marketing, contract marketing, and consulting for a lot of different B2B technology and additive manufacturing companies. So hardware, software, services, and materials. My responsibility is to come in and help their go-to-market, help their marketing, help their business development, do market research, strategy, content. It runs the gamut, right? And I think, Justin, you made a really good point that within 3D printing, having a strong marketing presence is really important, since we have so many different startups and new companies. And, many of these companies are built by engineers. And engineers, they know what they're doing. They're excellent resources from when it comes to technical, but when it comes to commercialization, you definitely need a business-minded person on the other side that can help kind of counter the engineering and add that sales and marketing perspective. So happy to be here, guys.
Great. We're real glad to have you. And, Ryan, I think you bring up a interesting point, and it's something that I've seen many times where we'll say marketing experts that don't come from the additive industry that come into the 3D printing industry or the additive manufacturing industry. And the approach to marketing and talking about and educating additive manufacturing is a little bit different. And frankly, I've seen a lot of what I would say expert marketers kind of struggle with figuring out how to talk about this technology. And maybe it's because we can hit on so many different sectors. And so I'm just curious, from your experience, what are kind of some of those common pitfalls and maybe what can they do to kind of overcome those? Because no doubt there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be coming into our industry moving into the future. And maybe you can talk a little bit about, how you approach it.
Yeah, there's a big difference between, let's say, B2B or B2C marketing. And the first thing you have to realize, especially talking with engineers, is that the very rational people, right? The speeds and feeds and all those numbers are going to be really important when you're marketing. You have to have those kind of questions answered ahead of time in order to even break through, right? An engineer, most of the time, engineers that are very rational folk, they want to problem solve on their own. So they're going to do their own research. So the first step is you need to have that data readily available, whether you're a hardware company, a software company, materials company, you need to have that information readily available. So I think coming into this, if you're a traditional marketer, and a lot of marketers are really, they're really creative people, right? They have to balance the line between market research and thoughtfulness and then actual doing and getting things done at the same time, right? So when they come into this industry, there's a lot to learn about working with engineers, being able to articulate uh, a piece of hardware to the masses, to other engineers, requires more than just regurgitation of what a CTO or some sort of mechanical engineer might say to you about this piece of technology. Again, across the board, material services, the works, and being able to basically share that information, you need to kind of become part engineer, right? You really need to go deeper. And in my experience in my career, the best way to do that has always been to learn through the users and the customers and the people that are pushing the limits. That's why I've been so thankful to be a part of the additive manufacturing users group and a lot of these other engineering organizations, because once I get to ask questions from the customer perspective, then I get to really understand how they're utilizing these pieces of technology. So you kind of have, most marketers when they come into this world or this realm, they have to have some sort of engineering. They got to become part engineer, and then again speak to the rationality and really kind of learn what's going on and be able to ask the right questions, which is really probably the hardest thing for a lot of newbie marketers coming into this industry. But for the most part, I think a lot of that information can be gathered just by having conversations. Me personally, I like to do the research. I like to go in depth, and I get a lot of questions answered just through a 30-minute phone call. So that's kind of my approach. But that's what I would say, right? Emotional versus rational thinking versus doing, and then how do you become a part engineer?
What do you think are the challenges between doing marketing for someone that's selling parts over someone that is selling equipment? And is there a lot of overlap, or is it very different?
There's still a lot of overlap. And in fact, they both have a certain amount of challenges when it comes to selling a 300,000, 600,000, $1.5 million piece of equipment, right? Versus selling a prototyping project or a one-off production project or something like that. Because for the most part, one project selling services, you're basically trying to cut costs down immediately and try to get, your best bang for buck when you go to market, when you're selling your product. You want to try to get as much monies back as you can. When you're looking at capital expenditures, right, and I'm trying to justify a $500,000 piece of equipment or something along those lines, that's a lot more to consider, right? You have training, you have installation, you have maintenance, you have facility modifications. There's so much more to consider outside of just a one-off engineering project that you want to work with a service provider versus bringing technology in-house. So there's a lot more money, there's a lot more evaluation, there's a lot more stakeholders involved, and of course, for any organization, unless you're some sort of research institute or academia institute, you're trying to evaluate your return on in your investment. And that takes a lot of participation from whether it's a product development group, whether it's a production group or the aftermarket group. All of those need to be taken into consideration, especially now. A lot of people are tightening their wallets. So if I'm going to buy a new piece of equipment, I certainly want to make sure that I can get my ROI within 18 to 24 months. And that's not the number, but I would say that's a safe one to use.
Really good point. So I'd like to dig in here a little bit, Ryan, because you and I have done some webinars and events together, and I've done quite a few of them over the years. And there's some marketing people that I've worked with where I don't know what their process are, but we go through all this prep work to get a really solid event put together or a good webinar or training, and 5 people show up. And a lot of them that I've done with you've somehow managed to get, 50, 100 or more people to show up, like even at a webinar. And I don't want you to necessarily reveal your secret sauce per se, but I'm curious, how do you do it? Because there is a really big difference I found from people who have the experience like yourself and people who are kind of newer. And I know it's no easy task, but I'm really curious how you kind of figure out how to do that regardless of what the topic is.
Yeah, there's no secret sauce, Dustin, and I appreciate a lot of the times that we've collaborated on a few different projects, so I appreciate that as well. And it comes down to me for over preparedness, over communication, and proper execution, right? Setting the expectations and your deliverables to say, listen, we're going to do 6 to 8 weeks worth of promotion, and here's what it's going to look like. And being thoughtful enough to say, what is our message going to look like? How is it going to be received? Also understanding that our audience takes information in differently. What I mean by that is some people like to read an article, some people go on LinkedIn, some people go get their email blast from 3dprint.com, some people like videos, right? So how do you get this type of different types of information in front of your audience effectively enough so that they want to engage with it, that they want to push print, push print, they want to push submit, and they want to send their information because nobody wants to be bombarded with emails and nonsense afterwards. So people are pretty protective of giving out their information to participate in any kind of one of these virtual activities. I will say, Dustin, and I'm curious your opinion on this as well, that webinars are still hard, right? I'm not sure if it's the best channel. It's a good education channel for internal communications throughout a company, but as a lead generator, as a marketing tool, the ones that are the most successful are the ones that are consistent, which means that if you're going to do a quarterly webinar, you better do that quarterly webinar and people expect it to be there. If you're going to do that once a month 3D talk show, I had a client that did that, you have to be consistent, and that consistency will eventually lead to better results in the future. So really it's over preparation, it's over communication, it's execution, and then I'll give you a fourth point, which is really about consistency. So I don't know if I have the perfect sauce, but I can certainly tell you that if you follow those four, that eventually it will start turning into good results.
And I think that's a really good point, because I've seen a lot of groups that they get so focused on doing the webinar or doing the event, they kind of forget why they're doing the event and what the outcome is and what they really want the customer to do next. I'm constantly hitting on, hey, what is the call to action, or what's the desired outcome? If we go through all this and make this amazing event, what do we really want people to do? And I feel like we're so focused sometimes on the feeds and speeds and the coolness of the technology, which there's no doubt there is, that we sometimes forget, hey, there's a customer journey here, and how do we pull them along, and what do we want them to actually do?
Yeah, Dustin, you had made a great point the last workshop that we worked on that same subject, and I really appreciate that because that's forward, that's holistic thinking. You just mentioned it, you stated it perfectly, and I think having that whole journey is super valuable. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
So with all the different avenues for marketing, you touched on a little bit of webinars, there's events, there's web pages, there's all these social media, all these different things. Like for 3D, where do you think is the best platform and way to reach the customers? I mean, it might depend on who you're representing at that point, but where do you think seems to be the most effective way to reach customers?
Different avenues to reach your customers, right? And I think it all starts with doing some general basic research. All marketers do some sort of persona research, right? So if you're going to be chasing someone in the DoD industry versus the supply chain industry versus the energy industry, whatever it is, right, is you have to understand your persona a little bit more. So what organizations are they a part of? What type of technologies are they using? What type of materials are they using? What kind of trade shows they go to? What kind of publications they read? What kind of user forums they're going to? And to be able to assess all of that, right, about your persona for whatever your target audience is, which whatever market, then you can start to determine, how you want to spend your marketing dollars and where you want to try to reach these different folks for different reasons. I do believe that you have to have a combination of both live, like trade show events and speaking engagements, combined with a digital approach, right? And it depends on how you want to do it. Is it 50-50, 70-30, 80-20? And then you also have to combine that into other avenues, like I mentioned, user forums. Ultimaker a few years ago, they had an excellent user forum, which was a really great resource for a lot of engineers to be able to go ask their questions openly and to get responses from other users. And I think that was a really great example of kind of a community marketing that was naturally born out of Ultimaker. They did a really good job with that. So, again, I do believe there has to be some sort of combination of digital versus live versus a handful of other different ways, PR, communications. There's so many different channels to be able to use social media, as you kind of briefly mentioned before as well. And really all of that is based on your persona. Who is the target customer that you're going after, and then really be thoughtful about what is the best way to get in front of them. I always use the example of myself. Again, B2B versus B2C, but myself, if I'm trying to cook a brisket on the grill, I'm going to research, how to, and I'm going to look up recipes. And after a year and a half of going to the same green egg website to look at recipes, I'm probably going to go buy one of their grills. So it's just one of those things where you have to combine a lot of different ways in order to get in front of your prospect genuinely, authentically, and also informatively, that you're providing content and you're getting information to them that's going to benefit them and help them in their day to day, in order to eventually get them to a point where they say, I trust you so much that I want to use your service, I want to use your technology, so on and so forth.
So what would you say is like a campaign that you're like, oh wow, that was smart, that worked, that you're like, oh, I'm going to take a tip from that, or can you kind of give an example?
Yeah, I had a
Successful.
product launch about 2 years ago that went over really great, and it was a combination of a lot of great asset development, so new videos, brochures, content for social media and whatnot. And then it was a PR strategy. So we had actually brought in a PR company to assist with timing of a strong press release. But then on the technical side, we had to have information. On the technical side, we had to have obviously the basic engineering information about the piece of hardware that we were launching. So coordinating that was challenging. Getting the website updated, timing was really important. And then it was launched at a trade show. So the press release went out the week before. All the assets were ready to go, and they kind of came out systematically as we went. And then the trade show, which was rapid, and really that was the prime audience because it was really, really targeted towards 3D users. While the technology can be relevant for other industries, you had to get 3D users on board in the beginning. And then you also had to combine this with a commercial component to this as well, where having a beta customer was really powerful. So marketing had to integrate, trademarking, asset development, press release, communications, sales, engineering, really bring everybody, finance for pricing and stuff like that, bring all of these different components together to launch a product. And that campaign, while it was great before the actual event, so say 2 weeks before the event, there's obviously about 3 months worth of work beforehand. The execution on the event was great. And then post event, really it's about the follow-up, really making sure that all the questions were answered with people, getting surveys, getting feedback. What it resulted in, I mean, the press mentions was through the roof. The website traffic went through the roof. There was a sample part that they gave away on their website with a very special material that was over, I think, 400 downloads within 2 days. One of the interviews that we had was viewed over 100,000 times.
Wow.
With a company called Vision Miner. You may be familiar with that. It was an excellent launch campaign. I was really proud of that. And again, it took a lot of different departments in order to make this successful. And then, of course, just really thoughtful and well coordinated attack.
So you brought up a good point that I've always wondered is how should marketing measure success, right? Is it views? Is it number of leads? Like what is a point where you go, okay, that worked really well?
It's all the above, right? There has to be metrics, right? And there's obviously some anecdotal stuff too that comes along with it. But I think if you have to have your goals and your metrics. So for me, I'm giving away my what I do with my clients, but I underpromise and overdeliver, right? That I set reasonable expectations, maybe a little below, just to make sure that we can try to hit these targets so that we can have some sort of success. Because if you do outrageous targets and unrealistic numbers, then it's a failure across the organization. And marketing tends to be very responsible for the vibe within a company, right? We are responsible for internal and external communication. So our goal is to be the cheerleaders of the company. And so my job is to set the proper expectations. And yeah, of course, there's metrics, right? There's website traffic, there's social media impressions, there's press mentions, there's all sorts of different metrics that you'll put into consideration for each campaign. And then, of course, when you're measuring leads, like we had all those downloads for those giveaway parts, the goal is in 3 to 6 months that there's a certain amount of pipeline developed accordingly, right? You work in your CRM system and you can say, listen, we gathered 300 leads, 50 of those turn into opportunities to generate. That's about $5.6 million, and we've actually closed one of those. To me, then the campaign is worth it, right? If you can get triple back on your campaign, so say it takes $100,000 to run a proper campaign through and through, and you can generate at least $300,000 and close one revenue, that's a really good start. People want more than that, of course, right? But that's a really good start. If you can triple your marketing investment, then you're in good shape.
So, Ryan, kind of related to that, if we could just imagine that you had all the 3D printing marketers in a room and you had a microphone like you do now, what would you say that to all the marketers out there, what in this industry, what we should do more of in marketing and what we should do less of collectively?
Okay. First, I do plan on getting all the marketers in this industry in the same room. So that is going to happen, Dustin. But I'm not sure I'm going to be the one coaching them. In fact, I want to hear what they have because I have a lot to learn as well. But I will tell you what they shouldn't do. And what they shouldn't do and what they need to get away from is exaggerated claims. We do a lot of that happens in marketing. And I think that's because the marketers don't truly understand what their product is capable of doing. They don't understand the go-to-market structure. They don't understand the addressable market. So they just kind of float exaggerated claims like we're going to revolutionize the manufacturing world and we're going to take over electronic tooling. And it's just not realistic. And that comes with there's a big difference between public versus private company marketing, right? Public companies, you can't really get away with those exaggerated claims. Private companies, they can say and do whatever they want. And I think that's kind of hurt us as collectively as an industry. And I would, and again, it's not for me to go and shame a marketer in this industry. That's not me, man. I'm not, I have a lot to learn. I'm not perfect either, but I can certainly say that we move away from those exaggerated claims, then we can be a little bit more authentic. And then from there, our prospects and users and clients will trust us with the information we share with them. Otherwise, they'll get disgruntled and then they're going to move on. And we've seen that happen several times in this industry.
Yeah, great point. So based on kind of what we've talked about so far, is there anything that kind of comes to mind that you think is important to highlight or to talk about?
Well, actually, I want to turn that question back on you guys, right? So what have you seen from some of the marketers that have been good, maybe bad, maybe ugly? I'm curious your perspective of things that you've seen.
I always wonder like how companies get to the top of the search list, right? I feel like, whether it's where we work now or other places, like how are certain people getting to the top of the Google search? And is it just being paid or Xometry, for example, you put anything about 3D printing, Xometry is going to be probably the first one that comes up. So whoever is over there is doing awesome. But how are they making that happen? Like, what is building upon that? So maybe it doesn't answer your question the way that you wanted, but I've always tried to figure out, like, how do we get more of that where people can push up to the top? And now it's time for layers of information.
I love this question, right? And this is something I'm dealing with every day with my clients on their digital approach. And I've done some really deep dives into the different competitors that I work with for and competing companies and whatnot to try to understand. There's the metrics exist, right? And so what that means is that the website, there's a lot of this has to do with website traffic, right? When you go to Google and you search, you're basically trying to get your website to the top of that list, right? You're trying to get on page one. So your website is your number one brand and lead generation tool by far. Excuse me. And also to add a little bit more to that I think most marketers would agree with me and most commercial companies would agree with me that your number one lead is the one that comes in through the website. And the number one lead, what I mean by that is that it's the highest conversion rate to an opportunity and the most dollars generated via or per lead, per opportunity. So your website is your number one tool. So investing in that is paramount. And now when you're asking your specific question about how do you get to the top of the results, there's certain things, right? There's a website authority score, which basically means that it's your user experience, right? So when I go onto the website, that the content comes up quickly, that it's a seamless experience, that the videos don't lag when they're trying to load, that the content is relevant for what I'm searching for, right? All of that stuff is highly relevant, that you have a good website and user experience when you go to that website. The second is content, right? If you're pumping out bi-weekly content or weekly content that's relevant, where it has the search terms, let's say FDM, MJF, nylon, ABS, titanium, and that's your market that you're targeting, those kind of search terms, the more often that they're on your website, the more likely that you are to get people that are searching those kind of terms, right? That's your target audience, and that'll improve your authority score. The next one is backlinks. What is backlinks? Backlinks means that that maybe your article has been referenced on another website, or maybe that people say go to endeavor3d.com, or you're a resource partner or you're a production partner. All of these different pieces, the backlinks, the authority score, the content, the user experience, all come together in order to get you higher up on the food chain. And all of this data is searchable. There's a tool called SEMrush that I've used many times, search engine monetization. And that is a great tool to be able to look at what your website does compared to your competitors, and then where you rank on searchability in regards to the key terms that you want to target and get in front of. So, Justin, on your side in the engineering world, there's a ton of data and ton of research and kind of protocol that you go through. Same concept for marketers.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Ryan, about where you think we or where we can improve from a marketing standpoint. Well, the biggest gripe I've had over the years is mapping the customer journey. I honestly, because of how fast the industry is moving and how many things all of us are doing all the time, I don't think us as an industry take the time to really map what the customer journey is like and really figure out what they need and deliver it to them when they need it. And an example I can think of is if you think about fitness, for example, you could think of someone that goes to the gym all the time. They're going to maybe get excited about talking about macros, for example. But the person who's just starting to go to the gym, they don't know what that is. They don't care what that is. They're just trying to show up to the gym, and just showing up to the gym is a big deal. And so I think what happens, because a lot of us are kind of nerds and engineers, we get so excited about the tech and we just want to talk about the feeds and speeds, when in fact, if you show that to someone who's just getting into the industry and just learning about it, their eyes glaze over and you lose them. And so I think us as an industry really need to take more time to map what that customer journey is, so we can lead them along the process and give them bits of information when it makes sense. And then they're going to be happier, and they're probably going to go through the process much faster than maybe what they are today.
I love it. The three of us have all been in a sales function in our life, right? And there's marketing, which tries to open up the door and get people to engage, and then there's actual sales, which is going through, the benchmarking process and the different parts of the approval and qualification of the technology for that particular company. And it's not easy. Like, I empathize so much with salespeople about about what they need to do in order to get their job done. So my intention is to always provide as much sales enablement material as humanly possible, but all of that stuff needs to align, like you said, with the customer journey. That whatever their maturity level is within their journey, that you're reaching them with the right information. And it's because my attention is important, right? My attention is very valuable to someone trying to sell to me. So if you only get my attention for 10 seconds, you better make it count. And if you give me the same generalizations and same exaggerated claims, I'm going to turn off immediately. And that's how quickly it can happen. That's why for marketers, there's that fine line between thinking and doing. And for each project, it depends. It could be a 70% thinking project and 30% doing. It could be an 80% doing project and 20% thinking kind of thing. But most of the time, I think you're absolutely right that acknowledging the customer journey and the prospect journey is paramount.
Yeah. And one other kind of question that kind of comes to mind, Ryan, since you've worked with a number of companies and hosted a lot of events, let's say you're working with a company and they want to do, let's just say, some random webinar, and you ask them, okay, who do you want to market to, or who's your primary audience? And then they say, well, just everyone. How do you work with that customer, and how do you help them through that? Do you catch what I'm kind of asking? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the reason I love what I do, guys, is because I can ask challenging questions. I'm a contractor, right? So I have a contract to come in and do well. And so most of my stuff is deliverable based, project based. And if I don't do well, they're not going to hire me again. So I have zero problem asking challenging questions and challenging my clients right back at them. Say, listen, are you really sure that, you think that the medical world is really the right avenue to go to? Do you have FDA manufacturing? Do you have the right materials? Do you have the right engineering experience? Because that's really challenging industry to get into. And so I have zero issue with pushing back. It's not one of my problems. In fact, because at the end of the day, I'm the one executing this webinar. I'm the one executing this event. And if it goes poorly, it's on me. And so that's why I push back. I set proper expectations. And that's my intention. Again, I'm using the company's money to make this successful. I pretend as if it's my money, right? And because at the end of the day, it's my reputation that's going to be attached to it. And my intention is that every single one of my clients that I work with is willing to give me a reference after the job is done, or they rehire me again. And for the most part, I'm shooting a really high percentage because I really care, and I can challenge them and push back, because that's why they hire me. They don't hire me to be a general marketer. They hire me because I have experience in this industry, and I can push them in the right way to help make them successful.
Great answer.
So when you look at the platforms, from my impression, LinkedIn seems to be the most active with additive manufacturing, maybe not 3D printing if we want to separate them that way. Is that something that you see, or is there like another platform that you see that people that are interested in additive are going to and using? But it seems to be pretty active, but maybe it's just because it's constantly putting things in my feed.
It's required, right? And it's where you're getting your information. So we're going to continue hitting you. But there is a ton of sales professionals and marketing professionals and business development professionals that are on LinkedIn. I mean, I got to ask it back to you, Justin. You're getting your updates about new technologies and new materials on LinkedIn, but are you getting engineering advice or engineering ideas? Like, are you getting anything like more tangible than commercial value from LinkedIn?
No.
Well, there you go. So although LinkedIn is an evil necessity, and from my world, marketing, LinkedIn is everything, right? My brand, everything like that is so valuable because that's where I live, is on that platform from a marketing and sales professional. But I know that my audience is kind of on there, right? They kind of care, but they're not, that's not the number one medium, in my opinion, for most engineers. And I think one of my favorite things to do, and this is just a tiny tactic, because you kind of asked about different channels, is speaking engagements. Because what happens is that if you look at all the different events, let's say in North America, engineering events, plastics events, metals events, welding, the casting, whatever it is, and if you can go and be ahead of the curve, submit an abstract and a consideration for presentation at that event, what I think is great about that is not only can you send an individual out there to present, to become a thought leader and to get the name out there, it's good brand awareness. It's also good for your engineers and your company leaders to be speaking in front of people about the technology and pitching the service or the technology that you have. And you can also have an opportunity to review if the event is worth exhibiting at the next year, right? So there's this commercial, the engineering, sales benefit. And again, this is a tiny tactic, but something I push very hard on with my clients is getting out there. Go talk to people, go present in front of people, because it's good for leadership to do that. It's good for branding and awareness for that. And it's also great research for what to do in the future when it comes to events. Because I still think we're a very tangible industry that people need to talk and be face to face and see things and hold parts in their hands. And it's a challenge because, I was just at IMTS. And again, now I'm going on a rant, and I apologize, Justin, but I do want to add this because I think it's informational, and I think your audience will like this. I was talking to a group that was at IMTS, and it was kind of a slow show. Maybe there were some quality prospects that came in, but he literally, the guy looked at me and he said, "You know what? He's on his phone using his calculator, and he's taking the amount of money they spent, they budgeted for the event, and the amount of leads that came in through the event so far, and they were looking at $1,200 per lead. $1,200 per lead is unacceptable, right? And so again, if the event turns out and you're making, a couple $100,000 or a couple $1,000,000 worth of opportunities, and you're gaining revenue, well, then you go back, right? But it's painful when you see that $1,200 per lead number. And that's just, again, anecdotally, back to your original question about, is LinkedIn the right avenue, or is it other things? And again, my small, tiny tactic is really about, I push speaking engagements hard.
That's a great idea. And Ryan, you, for the people that know you or the people who are listening and know you, everyone knows that Ryan's high energy and passionate and excited. And I'm curious, I haven't asked this to you before, Ryan, but what keeps you excited about keep continuing in this industry? Because you've been doing this for a while, and it's not always easy. Like what makes you kind of get up in the morning and get excited to keep pushing forward?
I love it because there's a few different answers to that. And one is, I've always enjoyed working with users of the technology, because like writing case studies has always been fun for me, and in interviewing users because you're like, wow, I didn't know you could mix pharmaceutical drug A and B in your technology and create a new mechanism for medical drugs. And then, it's just one example is just what the users are doing. I love it. I'm all about it. Also, we have so many startups in this space. It's kind of a problem with our industry that in most conventional commercial organizations, or engineering organizations, you go find a problem and then you build a technology to solve that problem. It's kind of the opposite out of manufacturing, where we're opportunistically creating these different technologies and materials, and then we're going to try to find problems to solve. And I actually love that. I love the startups. I love these challenges because although they can be kind of nichey at times, there's opportunities. There's people that are gonna gravitate towards this. And for me, that's an awesome challenge. And then of course, working with my clients, I mean, like I said, I'm deliverable based. So yes, I'm high energy, and I love pushing back and challenging people on certain things. But I get to meet so many interesting people all the time, and that really, that really motivates me because for the most part, like if I do a good job for them, then their business succeeds. I try to do a few different things in my business, in my career, and ultimately I'm not going to when I join a group, or if I add on to a marketing team, or I'm part of the C-suite or whatever it is, I want to make sure that place is in a better position than when I came in.
Like it. It's great.
So on the negative side of things, what do you think people shouldn't do? I mean, you mentioned a little bit about making claims that aren't true or are not necessarily feasible, but like what missteps do you see? And you're like, oh my gosh, especially with the amount of startups that you are mentioning, right? Because there are a lot of startups, and it's like, how do they get seen in any way, shape, or form? But what are the big no-nos?
From a big picture perspective, I think the exaggerated claims leads to inflated expectations. And I kind of mentioned before, as marketing is that internal and external cheerleader. And, if you have inflated expectations on your commercial side or your engineering side, and people continuously miss those, then that becomes a weight on the shoulders of everybody in the company. And then morale is going to be in trouble. That's just like big picture business, how I feel about that personally. From a marketing perspective,
You there?
yeah, I'm still here.
Okay.
Yeah, from a marketing perspective, problems that people are running into and stuff that they shouldn't be doing. I think a lot of marketers are creative, are more creative than they are strategic and tactical. And so what that means is, yeah, they like to make pretty pictures and they have good ideas, but the substance might be lacking sometimes. And what I mean by substance is kind of, again, thoughtfulness about the customer journey, becoming part engineer, be able to execute and be consistent. So I think a lot of marketers, not a lot, but there's a handful out there that are highly creative, and it's awesome. I love how creative they are, but you really have to balance that with being prepared, with being organized, with being a good executioner. That's again big picture. I'm not going to get too in the weeds on that, but I do believe that balancing the creative versus the thinking versus the doing, you have to have a mixture of all of those. And as a marketing leader, when I hire people, I know that I'm not super organized, right? That is one of my faults. I know that I'm a doer. I know that I'm a thinker. I know that I'm aggressive, but I'm not as organized as I'd like to be. And so that's why I make sure that I counter myself with hiring good people that are organized and creative. I'm not overwhelmingly creative. I think I am, but I think there's better people that are more creative than me. So I tend to lean on my resources in those capacities.
How do you think companies should like balance trying to market to, I would say, like the mass public? Like there's applications that get marketed that are like, okay, on the engineering side, it's like that doesn't really solve a problem. That's just for the complete masses, like some sporting equipment that will never be tangible for the consumer. But then people are talking about it, right? So it's successful from that standpoint, where I can go to my neighbor who knows nothing about 3D printing, and they might be like, "Oh, you saw a 3D printed basketball," but it doesn't necessarily solve a certain problem within basketball, right? So I think both have to be done, but like, how do you balance that? Like, how much you try to reach out to the masses versus the people that are actually going to be buying and using stuff.
Yeah, the fun projects versus the practical ones.
Right.
Right. I love it. And you're right. I think I saw, and I'm going to name drop, well, I won't name drop, but a metal company 3D printed a Captain America shield, right? And it was like, wow, on LinkedIn, everybody I knew had that shield in a picture, right? Or they had the Game of Thrones thing, and everyone loved it. And it was great because it was viral and it went everywhere. And that's cool, just like the basketball. Very cool. Not an overwhelmingly practical application for production in the long term when you're spending $2,500 per basketball or whatever it was. Okay, so the fun stuff has its place, right? It certainly has its place for violence. And what you have to do is to be able to leverage that into the practical and engineering world. And the best example I have is at IMTS, we had guys with TPU basketballs, right? Walking around and going around to the different robotics companies, and people were looking at it like, oh, you 3D printed that and it bounces? Wow, that's pretty cool. Wow, I bet you that TPU would work really good for an end of arm tool. And so how do you blend the fun projects into the engineering world? And that's really the complexity that marketers have to do, is not waste time on all the fun projects, but how can you leverage that fun project to be more practical for engineers? And that's probably my favorite thing to do.
So kind of related to that, over the years, when marketing wants to do an event or a webinar or something like that, maybe I'm involved or someone else is involved. And I've heard like R&D people make comments like, oh, R&D or marketing wants to do this event. I don't understand why we're going to do that. It doesn't make really sense. It seems like a waste of time or a lot of waste of resources. How would you respond to that? Like, what do you think maybe R&D or sales or other teams forget that the marketing teams have to do or do that really make a difference, and why maybe it seems like logically it doesn't make sense, but there's obviously good reasons why you're taking that approach.
Yeah, buying can be hard, and that's across the board, whether it's finance, R&D, engineering, operations, sales, across the board. And so, for me, I start at the top, right? And if I get buy-in from the CTO and the CEO, and most of the time I don't do anything unless I have their buy-in on most of the stuff, then it trickles down. For larger organizations, a little bit more complicated. And listen, there's always going to be noise where people are going to, listen, I can go to engineering and say, yeah, I don't think you should use this material, right? I don't think that's a good idea, but they're already 6 months invested into the material. And as a professional, I say, I'm going to let them do their job. And as a professional, they should look at me and say, I'm going to let him do his job. Now, if I continue to fail, they can certainly say, hey, listen, Ryan, I don't think you know what you're doing, and they can butt their heads in. But for the most part, I'm not going to go and say, you don't know what you're doing over there. I'll give my opinion if they ever ask it. And for the most part, that's probably the way to do it, right? Is that I go to the engineering teams. I'm like, hey, listen, I'm thinking about doing this show. I want to do this speaking engagement. I think this is a good idea. And I'll pitch it to them and get their buy-in, right? About, hey, you know what, Ryan, I think it's a really terrible event to go to. And I said, oh, I'll take that in consideration. And you kind of go from there. So ultimately, I would think that they, professionalism would say, I do my job, you do your job, but I certainly wouldn't do my job without having their buy-in at least a little bit. And I think that's the case too, is that, if engineering and product development is coming out with a new product, they have to engage marketing and sales. They have to. They'd be foolish not to, right? And the same concept for marketing is that if I want to do certain activities, I need to engage other departments within the group. R&D is kind of special. R&D and skunkworks, they're definitely on a different path than most of the other parts of the business, right? They kind of operate in their own silo, but for the most part, getting buy-in and being communicative is really my job, right? My job is to be communicative internally, externally, across the board, and over communicating tends to end well for me.
Oh, so with all the things that you've been involved in, and obviously you pay attention to or are paying attention to everything that's going on in our realm, what is the most innovative application that you think you've seen recently?
Most innovative. So I said this once before, and I'll say it again. This sucks to hear, but I chase the money. And what that means is I look at DoD spending, I look at semiconductor spending, and I look at medical device and healthcare spending, and I see that those are probably the most prominent industries that are spending the most money in both research and development and manufacturing. So if I look at semiconductor manufacturing and DoD manufacturing in kind of applications, Justin, I like the printed circuit board stuff, and the conductive inks and the materials and the conductive traces and whatnot. I think that's super interesting. Now, I'm not sure we're there or we'll ever be there, but that's an application that if we can pull that off, I mean, that'll be just incredible for a handful of different industries. So again, I'm not sure we're there. I'm not sure if we'll ever be there, but the printed circuit boards, the PCBs, I think is a really cool application.
Have you seen any like newer materials or machines that, outside of like the actual application, but the devices?
I know Nano Dimension was chasing it. There's another company down in Orlando, Florida, that's doing some stuff where they're doing dual material 3D printing. So they're actually printing the structure and the conductive trace. And it just hasn't gotten to that point yet. I know Copper is working on a handful of different machines, so that's been successful, but I'm talking, silver and a few other things as well. So there's a few companies chasing it. Again, I don't know if it's ever going to get there. And then I know as I'm saying this, I'm thinking about refractory metals as well, right? So the rhenium, the tungsten, those high performance alloys that are going to be really important for satellite launch vehicles, CubeSats, stuff like that. That stuff is likewise very interesting. So I don't have a great answer because I don't want to name drop too many companies, but I also, and again, there's just, the maturity level is not quite there.
Good points. So something that we've been asking all of our guests, it's resulted in some really interesting answers, is if you had a top resource or one resource that you think everyone should know about, if it's a webinar, magazine, email subscription that you subscribe to, what would you say that should be? And I'm actually going to go first here for a second because I was at an event this week, and you might even find this helpful, Ryan. And they were giving presentations, and they wanted people to interact and throw up questions like we normally do. And so they had this app called Pigeonhole. And what it is you can scan a QR code, put in your question, and then people can do the same, but they can also upvote questions that they like that other people put in there. So it kind of allows things to interactively go to the top so that, a presenter, they only have so much time to answer so many questions. They can kind of get to the top voted questions. I don't know if it's free or not, but it was a pretty good experience for me. So that, again, pigeonhole.at. But to you, Ryan, is there any kind of resource that you think everyone should know about?
Yeah, I mean, as a marketing research or a marketing tool versus an industry organization or something like that. And I got to tell you, Dustin, I'm pretty surprised you didn't say Chat GPT. I'm very, very surprised.
That's so last year. Come on, Ryan.
I got you, dude. I got you. But I know you well enough. Anyways, I would say, so I've done some, so I'll talk about this group that I think is interesting, that I've shared this information with a few different people recently, but everyone here probably knows America Makes. America Makes is a pretty good organization that does a really good job of being a custodian of research grants and connecting industry to, when I say industry, I'm talking about mostly DoD stuff, to all the OEMs and whatnot, and the machine shops and the doers. I think it's great. But there's a group called AM Forward by Astro America. Are you guys familiar with that?
I've heard of them, but I really don't know much about them.
Yeah, and basically they came out 2 years ago. It was a White House backed initiative. Basically, that some of the major DoD players, I think it was Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Honeywell, a handful of others, basically signed an agreement to two-part agreement, basically to increase the number of additive manufacturing parts being used for different applications within the DoD, and then to work with more small to medium-sized businesses. And so I wanted to learn more about this, right? And so there was a conversation at IMTS with the president of Astro America, and then there was a money guy there as well from Stiefel Capital. And really, the conversation was about basically how do we provide access to funds to startup companies in order to do more additive manufacturing. So I talked to them and I had a good conversation. And my understanding is that they are very supportive of small business companies, machine shops that want to integrate additive manufacturing equipment into their facility. But the funds are not just for capital equipment. It's also for supporting commercial infrastructure, engineering infrastructure, go-to-market operations. So, and again, they kicked it off 2 years ago. It hasn't had a lot of movement, but I think it's gaining momentum right now. So anybody that's listening to this and you're looking for some funding and some assistance, if you're a machine shop and you want to get further into this, you can check out AM Forward. And I certainly will be working with them and trying to find ways to leverage not only their access to monies, but their connections with these massive DoD primes, and kind of go from there. So that's what I got for you, Dustin.
That's awesome.
I think that's a great resource.
Work in progress. We'll see how they do. I'm gonna hold their feet to the fire. I'm gonna push them and make sure that I can find wins for my clients.
To add a little bit to what you said, Dustin, actually, I was talking to David Johnson, and he did a presentation at AOPA with Dimation, with Emily Simpson, and they had a QR code on every slide. And that allowed the audience to scan it so they could download that particular slide, right? Which allowed them to track what the audience was most interested in. And
Nice.
I found that to be pretty awesome. I was like, wow, I never even thought about that. So we generate all this content, and it's like, what is seeming to be more valuable to the audience, right? Like, what are they interacting with the most? So that's something new that I found out today, actually, that I think is a good practice that I'll use moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, because I think we're still at this junction where we don't fully know how to bridge the physical with the digital. And you know, I'm sure, Ryan, you're running into this all the time where it's like, well, what content really matters? What content really moves people forward? And if you could combine that along with the interactivity, so people can, you know, stay focused on the speaker, but also, you know, upvote questions that they really are curious about, then it kind of bridges that divide. And because otherwise it's just information transfer, and anyone can do the information transfer, right?
You nailed it. There's your customer journey and your immediate engagement and your measurables all in one.
I look forward to the next time we do something together. I'm sure you'll have that all wrapped up in a bow, right, Ryan?
I got your back.
Well, before we close it down, is there anything that you want to kind of like plug? I mean, you're in marketing. Let's hear what you got.
Guys, I listen. I appreciate you guys giving me a platform to kind of talk about, you know, marketing in general, right? I could talk about my business, or I could talk about, you know, what's going on strategically and tactically across the industry, and that's definitely more fun for me. You know, I'm always looking at finding new clients to work with, right? I try not to do anything overlapping, meaning like I'm not going to work with two metal 3D printing providers at one time, but I certainly am growing. I work with a lot of subcontractors for content, contractors for video, for website, for public relations, communications, the works, right? So, you know, I'm definitely interested in taking on more projects and growing this thing. Starting my own business I didn't plan on doing it, guys, but here we are, and it's been fun and successful, and the goal now is to grow it and start keeping my subcontractors and future employees hungry. So that's my goal, guys.
This has been very informative. I learned a lot in this session, and I'm happy that you joined us, and we'll have to continue conversations outside of this and learn from each other and continue. But thank you for joining us today.
Thank you both.
All right. And everybody, you can catch us again on the AM Insider. Thanks for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from AM Insider, you can follow us on LinkedIn at AM Insider, or send us an email at justin@aminsider.org or dustin@aminsider.org. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.